If you would like to know more about this specific build or go into a bit more depth, there are separate episodes on this build on the channel which go in a lot more depth and are a bit longer. This is just a sum up of all those separate episodes built up into one, made a bit shorter and maybe a bit more entertaining. A lot of the products used in this episode are linked in the description down below, and if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. So the standard two-door EG Coupe kit is not really available, so luckily USCP made a conversion kit. And in that conversion kit they also had a different option, and that is this one, to convert it into the Fast and the Furious Heist Civic. So there's a lot of parts in this box that convert the regular two-door coupe into that specific movie car. Like a lot of the bumpers, front, rear, side, some spoilers, and even some other parts to make it a complete kit. You do need, of course, the Hasegawa donor kit in order to build it all up, but otherwise it is pretty much all included in these two kits. Before the paintwork can start on the body, we of course need to prep it. There are a couple of braces molded in so that the roof doesn't collapse during shipping. These of course need to be cut out first before I can do any further modifications and or preparations to the body. The supports for the body and also a lot of the sprue parts now have been removed from all of the pieces, and it could then all be glued together. The fitment on most of the parts was pretty good straight out of the box, but it did require a bit of sanding here and there just to make it nice and flush, and also some of the panel lines needed to be scribed out to make them look clean again, and also just a bit deeper so they wouldn't disappear after a couple coats of paint. With all of that taken care of, I could move on to sanding the entire body with a 400 grit sanding sponge in order to get it ready for primer to stick to it properly. In this case, I'm using a Tamiya gray primer, just a regular spray can. This is suitable for plastic, metal, and also resin bodies as it sticks really well and is a super good primer overall. After a couple coats, I just let it sit and cure, went over the body again, sanded it down, saw a couple of flaws that needs to be fixed, so built those up, sanded it smooth again with a 600 grit just to get rid of those rougher scratches, and moved on to the final coat of primer. The final coat of primer was set to cure for about 30 minutes to an hour before sanding it smooth with 3000 grit just to get rid of any of the imperfections that might be in there and also give it a super smooth finish before I started applying the base coat color. I'm going for a Honda original color that was supposedly on these cars for the movie, just applying it on those hard to reach, easy to forget spots first and then moving over to the rest of the body with a good couple coats as well. A couple coats of black have been applied. About 30 minutes have passed after the final coat was put on, and I could then move on to mixing the clear coat and applying that too to give it a nice glossy finish. So after painting the body, I set that aside for a couple of days to cure, and then in the meantime moved on to the interior. Some sprues were needed to be cut off first, a little bit of cleaning here and there. Some filler was applied to the headrest as well, as there was a big hole in there which didn't really look all that pretty, so that needs to be filled up and cleaned before moving on to painting all of the parts in various different colors. The filler that I'm using here is a light curing putty, which is UV sensitive. So after applying the filler, you just put a UV light on top of it for a couple of seconds and it fully cures. You can then sand and shape it to your desires. All of the parts were then primed and painted in their color. The color that I'm using for the base here is a black mixed with a little bit of a primer color, just to make it sort of a navy NATO gray and not a full black. It was then set to cure for a couple of hours before masking it off to paint the secondary color, which again was a mix of primer and black, but then more towards the gray instead of the black. Now that all of the main colors on the interior have been applied, I could start detailing it out, first laying down a bit of carpet. I'm just gluing this in place with some clear coat, then putting the flocking on top of it while it is still fully wet, and then moving on to the next section until the entire carpeted areas are covered. For some additional details, I painted them with a black just straight out of the bottle and a small brush, and also added some silver highlights here and there before doing a bit of assembly. So like I said, when doing the interior, I set the body aside to fully cure and could then move on a couple of days later while the clear coat has hardened to fix a couple of the dust spots that were in there, and also a little bit of orange peel that needs to be sanded out. I will be leaving links in the description to most of the products used, so feel free to check those out if you're interested. With most of the imperfections now removed from the body and it is nice and glossy again, I could move on to cutting the glass. Now this of course is the glass from the standard kit for the 4-door version, and that doesn't really fit in this coupe, so it needed to be cut and modified a little bit here and there. I also needed to paint the outside rubber, so I quickly just masked it off, cut it out, and sprayed a couple coats of flat black on top of it to simulate that rubber look. So on the movie car, the windows are tinted pretty dark, and I needed to replicate that on this one as well. So I figured I'd try something new, and that is the Hasegawa tint foil. Now I'm not a really big fan of it. It does work, and it's a really quick way to do it, but it doesn't really give a super nice finish. Although it does look okay, most of it is just hidden anyway. But then again, it's not a perfect solution, so maybe I'll try something else in the future. But for now, this one will work really well on this, and all of the parts could just be glued in place and I could move on with the build. After sanding and filing some of the clear parts for the front and rear lights, they got a test fit and fit nicely in place. So I could move on to giving a nice reflective finish on the taillight buckets and also on the headlight buckets too. The lenses of course needed some color as well, so I took out some clear orange and clear red and just applied a couple of light coats with a brush. I let the paint cure for a bit and then could carefully glue them in place with some microcrystal clear. With the taillights now glued in place, I looked at some reference photos and they looked a bit too bright. They seemed to be tinted in the movie, so I figured I'd do that as well by applying a couple coats of smoke clear. After completing the exterior side, I moved on to the chassis. It was a really simple chassis, not a lot of components, so I just quickly painted most of them black, some silver here and there, and a bit of textured black as well, and also some chrome finish on the wheels just to make them pop and look like the ones in the movie, and could then move on to adding a lot of the lights in. With this being a pretty iconic feature of the movie car, the green neon lights underneath, I of course could not leave that out, and I found a simple solution, and that is EL wire, also known as electroluminescent wire. It's pretty simply just a wire that lights up. You attach a battery on one side, glue it in place where you need it to be, and then just cut off the other end once you need it to stop, of course. Now, some of these areas do not need to have the light there, so I just painted those parts black. A tiny bit of weathering has also been done to the brake calipers, the exhaust, and some other chassis components, and then they could all just be glued together. One final bit that needed changing was the exhaust. The one from the kit standard is of course not a really good looker, and the movie car just simply had a big muffler installed, so I figured I'd do the same. The exhaust pipe itself needed to be lengthened just a bit in order for the new muffler to be fitting correctly to the longer body on this one. It was painted silver, and then the new metal muffler from Streetblisters was also installed, and that finished off this build.